What up, it's Prime Pete, and it's no secret at this point that modern matchmaking is manipulating you. And if you didn't know, then welcome to reality. There's two main types of matchmaking that you see in almost every multiplayer game. sbmm, or skill-based matchmaking, and its lesser heard of, but far more dangerous brother, eomm, or engagement-optimized matchmaking. The importance of making the distinction between sbmm and eomm has become more and more important as multiplayer gaming progresses. Anyone can see that the majority of multiplayer games have gone downhill, and the corrupt matchmaking and money hungriness are the two main culprits for this downfall. Before, multiplayer titles were revered. Now, everyone says the solution to making gaming fun again is to go play a single-player title. While that is very fun, don't get me wrong, multiplayer gaming holds a special place in many gamers' hearts, including mine. Because of that, I want to explain the evolution of modern matchmaking systems so that players can be aware of what they're getting themselves into when simply trying to experience a multiplayer game. To start, sbmm, or skill-based matchmaking, has been implemented into multiplayer titles to create quote-unquote fair lobbies, or at least that's the lie we've been told about its existence, if the developers have even acknowledged it in the first place, which most of the time they never do. This is what is said about it to make companies seem like they're doing the right thing in order to come across as caring about their whole player base and not wanting players to be unfairly matched. It's quite the opposite happening. While skill-based matchmaking on the surface seems harmless and at first glance looks like something that ensures everybody just has fun, upon further inspection, there's no wonder it's been receiving such heavy backlash in modern multiplayer gaming, especially recently. Skill-based matchmaking, although a much more primitive version of engagement-optimized matchmaking, is created for one reason and one reason only: to addict whoever is playing the game. See, the way this system works, put simply, is exploiting our human egos, especially those of young people, typically from ages 12 to 25, the crowd that typically plays these multiplayer games the most, like Call of Duty, Fortnite, Apex, Overwatch. You see where I'm going. When you perform well in a match, the game essentially says, "Not so fast, Buster. Now you're gonna play in an arena when everyone is just as good as you, and you're sitting there wondering why you're getting absolutely mutilated in this ridiculously sweaty lobby." But of course, the reason you hear is, well, it's just fair. Actually, it's not only totally unfair, it's not even for the sake of fairness, it's for the sake of addiction. When we humans notice that we're doing good at something or getting better, our brains fire off rewarding chemicals like dopamine and serotonin. The same happens when we perform well in a match. We feel good, we have fun, we feel accomplished. However, once you do well, the game raises the difficulty of your next lobby significantly. Why? Well, it's certainly not because you're getting better. It's because of what they're trying to manipulate inside of you, your ego. If you do well in a game, you feel good. Then in the next game, you play people maybe close to you in skill level, and you won't do nearly as well. Your kill-death ratio stays around a 1, meaning for every 1 kill you get, you're going to die, on average. Well, we don't like performing average because we just dominated in the last game. This invokes a response, the urge to prove that we can play well regardless of the skill level of our lobbies. That keeps even the casual players hooked, because a high majority of gamers have to be reassured that they're somewhat competent at the game they're playing, and when they're not, they keep playing to improve and prove themselves. Then once they brave these challenges, the lobby's difficulties just raise even more, invoking the same exact response over and over again, creating a diabolical negative feedback loop. Basically, if you haven't caught on yet, this is a never-ending cycle. Players do well, have fun, want that dopamine hit again, get mad when they don't get it because their lobbies increase in difficulty, and play more to get to the point where they can perform equally as well in that new lobby difficulty, then just get bumped up to the higher one as a consequence. So their kill-death ratio is not only stuck at a 1 at all times, the lobbies also scale in difficulty proportionally to how good they are. So no matter how good you are at the game, you theoretically should be performing the exact same in every match. But I'll touch on this later. There are many reasons why this system is awful though. To name just one, good players are never legitimately rewarded for being good because they just get matched up with players with equal skill. But that's the psychological trick. Skill-based matchmaking is not about fairness, it's about addiction. The same painful consistency of the player's performances trick the player into playing more to appease their ego and brave the challenges that the game servers have artificially created to be harder than the last game. This system is not only devastatingly effective if done properly, it can also be extremely obvious and annoying if it's too powerful, which results in each match feeling the exact same. If you naively defend the system and you say, well, it's just to keep everything fair, and we don't want the top 10% of players destroying the bottom 10%, that's not what it's about at all. I completely agree that players in those brackets should not be matched together, but when you realize that every lobby you play in has players at or near your skill level, making it a very mentally taxing match, especially when you want to play casually and you're put in tournament level sweat-fast casual lobbies, like the top 20% of players for every game, or around there. Although this isn't the case much anymore, and even someone who complains about and hates the system like I do, I don't notice the games that I play having very sweaty lobbies. But that's because companies have long since upgraded this very primitive form of matchmaking into what we call eomm, engagement optimized matchmaking. This system is essentially sbmm on steroids, trend, and testosterone boosters. Remember what I said about inconsistency? It breeds addiction because it abuses a player's ego unfairly. eomm is the ultimate plan for companies hungry to addict their players to earn more money because it breeds even more addiction, simply because it allows for even more inconsistency. Engagement optimized matchmaking is a pretty advanced system, but it's not too hard to explain. Rather, it's truly how the code functions that is pretty complicated. Truth be told, it's not that difficult to understand. Basically, instead of offering skill-based inconsistency by giving you inconsistent gameplay in the form of proportionally increasing difficulty of each match to make players aggravated that even though they got better and still perform the exact same, it now reads the player's patterns of play and analyzes what kind of game will likely keep them playing the longest, and tries its best to extend that duration after each attempt to keep the player hooked. Basically, it uses the fact that fun and aggravation paired together creates the extra amount of inconsistency that is highly addictive. Instead of having matches that are only placing you in equal competition, now the algorithms read your patterns. Do you get off after a bad game? Do you keep playing after a good game? Or the opposite? Do you want to end on a good note? Do you want to just play one more match to do well and then get off? It then sees what you're most likely to do in each given situation and gives you the match that will best suit what it deems to be your psychological needs. Further, it will also purposely create even more inconsistency in your matches. For example, the system has you do really well in one game. Like, you absolutely smack the other team and you easily top frag. You think you're getting better and you're doing really well, but all of a sudden you're thrust into a match and you get demolished. But wait, you think, didn't I just get better? What happened? Oh well, let's just try again. Then you play really well in an easier lobby. Wait, didn't I just do awful a second ago? You start to question yourself. Alright, well maybe that was just a bad game. You play again and you have a lot of fun winning. Then the game after, you get smacked again and you're left questioning how your performance could be so bad, then so good, then so bad again. You decide to get off in aggravation after your horrible 5th game. eomm even takes note of that. You get off after the 5th match in the session after 2 good ones because you did poorly. Next time, it'll likely give you an easy 5th game to match your play patterns in an attempt to keep you playing for longer in the next session to encourage addiction and in turn get some money out of you. eomm is a multifaceted system, and it isn't restricted to exclusively changing who you're matched against. Speculatory implications of this matchmaking have also been made. Remember, speculations, not necessarily the truth, but in my opinion, there's enough evidence to go around that I believe it. And this regards patented software by Activision that manipulates damage, hitboxes, audio, and other elements that may negatively or positively affect players playing in a certain match. While it's not necessarily 100% proven, many in-game examples of it are proof enough to myself and many others who notice that there is definitely something fishy going on with the game. For example, if the eomm algorithm is set on making you underperform in the current game you're playing because it knows that if it does, you'll play another match, it may not only put you in the lobby with only very sweaty players, it may put you in a lobby but then have your weapon do less damage, or maybe you have less health, or it increases your opponent's aim assist strength when aiming at you, it increases latency and ping when in proximity of a certain player, or it makes certain players' footsteps quieter or silent when they're running near or behind you. Long story short, it's not only a matchmaking algorithm, it's an algorithm that more or less tries to script out your performance by making it as difficult as possible for you to evade the result it's trying to force you to have. If eomm really wants you to lose the game and bottom frag, it's going to go out of its own way to attempt to force you to have this result. If you can evade it by playing better, great, but it won't be easier when the server is working against you. Further, if a player isn't good enough to go off and completely destroy the other team, but that player is deemed to need a good game to stay playing, or they've just purchased cosmetics, the eomm algorithm may work in their favor so that they perform well and as a result extend their play session. It doesn't only have to work against you. In some situations, I can clearly see that it has worked for me and other players as well. This doesn't exclusively affect Call of Duty either. There's loads of titles that have weird little occurrences and systems that handicap players who are either worse or who buy cosmetics, like Fortnite, Overwatch, Apex Legends. But Fortnite is a wonderful example. You ever notice that when you're fighting a player who is much less competent building or aiming, that your bloom suddenly becomes really horrible? Or someone who bought a $20 skin who is matrix dodging all of your bullets somehow? You could just say you're getting unlucky, but that's what they want you to think. This subtle matchmaking trick is how they keep worse players from getting too aggravated and saying, I couldn't do anything, I just got lasered by that sweat. On the flip side, have you ever noticed that bot players, or players who cannot usually aim or build that well, tend to have the greatest bloom of all time? Hilariously, I noticed this the most when the balloons item was released for the first time. If you guys remember those, you could attach them to yourself and then you could float up in the air. Anyone with a brain knew that using balloons was a surefire way to get yourself killed because you can't react and build when you're shot at. But how I saw it as a very sweaty player there was that the bots that decided to actually use them could still hit every single shot they fired at me and take off my entire shield while floating in the air. And keep in mind, the weapon spread is way higher when you're using balloons. I just found that to be very weird. And these are just anecdotal examples of how eomm affects Fortnite, but I digress. It can also be used to encourage microtransactions through means of artificially making players who purchase cosmetics perform way better in a match, in order to make it appear as if whoever purchases skins performs better, and that there is a correlation between spending money on cosmetics and performance. We can observe this Activision design pattern here. We can see that through these systems designed by Activision, the marquee players, or the players in question who have purchased these cosmetics, will be put in easier lobbies to pub stomp worse players and maybe convince them to buy a skin because of how well they're playing. According to my own personal observation, if the player isn't capable of pub stomping, they'll just receive silent buffs that make it a lot easier for them to secure kills and win the game. Ultimately, eomm is a system designed to addict you and make you spend money on the game by making your performance inconsistent, make you question why you're getting killed by players who seem incapable of using a controller, and making players who purchase cosmetics automatically perform better against players who have never bought cosmetics. This is true evil genius, the missing cog in the system of skill-based matchmaking, the ultimate psyche manipulator using the effect of inconsistency on the human ego. This upgrade to skill-based matchmaking is leaps and bounds more effective, and doesn't cause players to quit because every match turns out like a tournament. They reckon that if they let players pub stomp every so often, then get destroyed the other times, they'll be left questioning why their performance is so inconsistent, reason they'd have to blame it on themselves, and they can't quit playing the game because they'd just be a quitter. A lot of people are unfamiliar with the differences, which is why I thought it was necessary to create a short video explaining the differences between the two. Essentially, eomm is the predictable trajectory of the multiplayer gaming industry, unfortunately, because it unarguably accomplishes more than sbmm. Both systems are extremely irritating and wrong to be so dialed in as they are today. sbmm is arguably more justifiable than eomm because eomm is just straight up manipulation, no doubt about it. But in games that, for example, feature 1v1s, skill-based matchmaking is way more necessary because you don't want these matches to end up in somebody getting stomped. Because not only is it super aggravating for them, it's also just boring for the better player as well, because beating somebody in a 1v1 so far below your league just isn't enjoyable, not if you genuinely value fair competition with people, or at least somewhat near your skill level. So sbmm isn't completely bad in certain games, but imagine we put eomm within the context of a 1v1 game like Mortal Kombat, Street Fighter, Super Smash Bros. Imagine how obvious it would be at that point, getting matched up against someone you dominate, and then matched against someone that absolutely dominates you, and this just happening over and over again. It wouldn't be obvious that something fishy was going on, it would also just be so annoying to the point where your inconsistency would never stop regardless of how good you are at the game. Since eomm functions so much better in games with larger lobbies, like 6v6 in the case of COD, it can be so much more covert and be so much harder to deduce what exactly is going on. But what do you guys think about this? Do you think that this can be stopped, or do you think we have to just deal with the manipulations of modern multiplayer gaming? Let me know in the comments. But that's all I got. Take it easy.